Pilots are now being blamed in the aircraft accident in South Korea that ran into a barrier, killing 179 passengers. As a jet pilot, I'm going to break down what we now know from the just released interim report on this accident that killed 179 individuals. Here you can see the aircraft belly landing, emergency landing, the opposite direction of what the runway was being used for, suggesting possibly there was a tailwind pushing the aircraft, in addition to the fact that the aircraft is landing without its gear down, limiting any actual wheel braking application, hoping to skid to a stop, but unfortunately not making it to a stop after a bird strike killed one of the engines. Mind you, aircraft engines are designed for bird strikes, but when you get through a flock of birds or you hit large enough birds, you could end up with a situation like a Miracle on the Hudson, where you end up losing both engines in a very rare circumstance, or in a case like this one, where a bird strike ends up leading to the loss of engine power on one of your engines, and then pilots unfortunately make a fatal mistake that leads to the belly landing of the aircraft, an unfortunate overrun into the ILS concrete foundation at the end of the runway, leading to the death again of 179 people. Absolutely devastating crash. And now we have details into what actually happened, and it's very disappointing. Take a look at this. A close source to the South Korea-led investigation told Reuters there is now clear evidence that the pilots mistakenly shut down the wrong engine. 2 people survived this crash, but apparently per the interim report that we're hearing, along with, according to the now released interim report, the Aviation and Railway Accident Investigation Board presented its latest report to victims' families, which concluded the pilot mistakenly turned off the left engine, so your number 1 engine, not the engine on the right side, the number 2 engine, which was severely damaged by a bird strike minutes before the plane made an emergency landing. This, apparently, after investigators found no defects in the engines and, unfortunately, contributing to the lack of that landing gear deployment. Now, something that's important to remember is when we look at an accident like this, we see, okay, no gear down. Why could there potentially be no gear down? Well, if you don't have your engine-driven hydraulics, you'd have to go through a manual process to extend the gear, and unfortunately, that could take 10 to 15 minutes in an aircraft of this size. Whereas this aircraft went from Mayday call to landing in under 4 minutes. Not enough time to manually lower the gear, and without either of the engines operating because of mistakenly shutting down the wrong engine, the aircraft essentially had no choice but to make a belly landing. Unfortunately, now we know, due to pilot error. Now, usually the last thing anybody wants to blame is pilot error, but at this point, it looks more clear that what ended up happening was you had a bird strike that disabled the right engine. After you have a disabled right engine, there's a likelihood that if you continue to feed fuel to the engine, you're going to end up leading to some form of an engine fire, which obviously calls for a shutdown procedure of that engine. Something that I always say when you fly a jet engine, here's actually me in short shorts and a Don't Sue Me bro shirt, taking off this weekend, going to Disneyland with the family. But anyway, what you'll see is after we take off and we rotate here through the clouds, I'll show you where our engine switches are. So if we just move the mouse out of the way over here, our engine switches, goes away in just a moment. Our engine switches are below that throttle there on the left side, all the way down here. And what's really important in an engine failure in a jet engine, and frankly a piston engine, is making sure you identify and verify that you're shutting down the correct engine. Pilots are trained not only in simulators, but check rides when you get licensed with the FAA to prove that you can handle an engine failure and you shut down the correct engine. Shutting off the wrong engine is obviously a fatal mistake. You would lose all thrust and you have essentially no choice but to land. They were fortunate they made it to the runway after shutting down the wrong engine. Unfortunately, when what happens often when you get pilots, and it's unclear if this is sort of what they fell to, when you get pilots who are used to flying pistons that maybe don't have a lot of hours yet in jet, they're rushing to turn off that failed engine, because in propellers we think about feathering the prop to reduce the drag on the aircraft. In a jet engine, it doesn't make a difference. That jet engine isn't going anywhere. In fact, my son made me this for Father's Day. Well, I mean, he assembled it for Father's Day. It's actually kind of a good little depiction here. These engines, you can't feather the blades on these puppies, so it doesn't really matter. You're not going to reduce the aerodynamic drag on one side of the aircraft. So in this case, it appears that the aircraft had a bird strike on the right engine. They had positive thrust on the left engine, which would have led to an asymmetric yaw. A lot of the aircraft are really good nowadays at actually providing that sort of counter yaw for you, usually through just rudder trim that's being imposed by the aircraft control systems, or your foot for that matter. But now the goal would be for a pilot to identify and verify, okay, we have an engine failure on the right, thanks to bird strikes, fire risk, we're dumping fuel on it, we need to cut the fuel over here. Usually what we do to verify is we check the throttle. We move the throttle of the right engine to idle. Now, if you have a dead engine on the right and you move the throttle to idle, and all of a sudden you hear, woo, well, you know you're killing throttle on the working engine. So this is why we usually say throttle off on the dead engine first, and then make sure that you still have thrust, and then match your fuel shutoff valve in your now emergency checklist procedure. Make sure you're shutting off the fuel for that same side. So in this case right here, you'd be pulling back the throttle on the lever right here, and then shutting off our engine for this side. Now, if you're shutting off the wrong engine 600 feet above the ground, much like what you saw in the Air India circumstance, there's really no way to recover from an accident like this. So, not great. That said, very disappointing to see this, because this is something that is regularly trained. So I'm really surprised to see this. Here are some of the time frames that Wiki points out. As the plane was preparing to land, it was warned about a flock of birds and a potential for bird strike. About 2 minutes later, the pilots broadcast a mayday alert advising they were going to go around. This was followed by a request to land just 1 minute later in the opposite direction. The reason we hear opposite direction being important here is because if you land with a tailwind, you're more likely to get pushed down that runway, which is not convenient. Tailwind landings can be practiced, and I've done them before going into, for example, Monterey Airport. Very common airport that you're going to see tailwind landings in. However, we're only rated to land with a certain speed of a tailwind. In my aircraft, that's only about 10 knots, which is very, very low for all aircraft have a relatively low tailwind land. Generally want to land into the wind. But anyway, the landing gear was not deployed. The request was authorized at 9:01, and we could see here that the crash occurred at 9:03. Now, if we go through here, you can actually see here, even if a hydraulic system failed, there should be auxiliary equipment. This is in reference to lowering the gear. But activating that takes time, noting that less than 3 to 4 minutes passed for the accident to occur, and getting that auxiliary device to lower could take up to 15 minutes. Unfortunately, this is an example here where pilot error appears to have shut down the wrong engine, leading to the death of 179. Very, very sad and terrible. Here, by the way, is I have a Instagram story here of that 10 knot tailwind ILS approach into Monterey. I'll just kind of play that there. But it's you can follow me on Instagram if you ever want to see more of these at Meet Kevin or Real Meet Kevin on X. But this is into Monterey, which is actually a very unique airport because they have crushable concrete on each end. Right here under the rabbit, the lights there, you'll see crushable concrete. So if you ever run over the end of the runway, that crushable concrete will slow your plane down, which is something that you did not see in South Korea, which does also bring up the question, why were we in a place where you had a concrete barrier at the end of this runway and not some form of arrestor system in the event of an overrun. Like in other words, who puts concrete like this at the end of the runway? We understand it's for an ILS, but there are ways to position this to where it's not the thing you run into if you slightly overrun the end of the runway. And this is what was very concerning about this in terms of airport design. You could see here is where the runway ends. And relatively soon after the end of that runway, you get this elevated concrete barrier here for the ILS localizer to keep you, essentially centered as you're approaching the airport in the weather. So this would be sort of your left and right alignment signaling system here to keep you, aligning with the center of the runway in the event that you're landing in the weather or clouds or whatever. So a little bit of an odd design here, rather than having, especially if you have a concrete barrier here, to not have some form of crushable concrete here. Sorry, that would be right here, is a little odd. This would be a perfect place for that sort of product. Actually see, if you Google it, crushable concrete, that's sort of they call it the Engineered Material Arrestor System, EMAS. But what it looks like in use is something more like this. And you can see here, this is in an article, crushable concrete makes 7th save at Teterboro, snatching a Gulfstream 5 SP that overran at Teterboro in a landing during rain and windy weather. None of the passengers or crew were injured. See, this is what we need more of, is sort of like landings are the most dangerous phase of flight. And so I think there's a lot of value in investing into technology that could save lives and avoid this. Here's just another angle of, your approach lighting system here, your ILS system. You could see the what's left of it here and the red radio signals right here. The little towers, if you will, small towers, whatever you want to call them. But very, very terrible. And this was quite a long airport as well, although the aircraft did touch down quite a bit down the runway, which was also unfortunate, although quite a lot of speed coming into that landing there. Just no more. If you have both engines shut down, there's no going around anymore. You're done. You can go around with one engine all day long. But you can see here, they shut down probably about a third of the way down the runway, or touchdown rather, about a third of the way down the runway, maybe about 25%, which certainly contributed to the leftover speed that they had when they impacted that ILS wall or concrete foundation. Terrible situation, and really sad to hear about the shutting down of the wrong engine. I know a lot of people then say, "Oh, this is the industry saying it wasn't the pilot, it was the pilot's fault. It wasn't, the manufacturer of the engines." Engines have quite a substantially low fail rate on jets, and really you don't even need two of them. You really just need one of them. Somebody writes, ILS are out of date anyways. Let's move to RNAV, 100%. Yeah, random navigation. It's GPS based. WAS is great, very accurate. I actually like using the ILS. I find it to be a very accurate system. Certainly anything over VOR. But I'll fly an ILS into Santa Barbara, or actually I have an ILS approach into Santa Barbara. That would be, I think that was in my pusher video. Is it? No, it's not in my pusher video. Stalls. Oh, it's in my stall video. Yeah, here's an ILS approach into Santa Barbara after we do stalls. You can actually see green needles here. Really hard to see just because it's so blurry where this video is positioned, but this is me taking an ILS, and this is exactly what it's designed for. I'm in the clouds, and I'm following that green needle into the runway. That's what those red beacons or whatever you want to call them do. They allow me to follow and line up with that needle saying, okay, you're too far to the left, too far to the right, or whatever. And then, of course, we have a glide slope for the vertical purposes as well for those non-pilots wondering. But that's what an ILS will do. Sure, we could use a GPS approach into here as well. See if you could get another view of it there. You can't really. But this was for a practice missed approach over here. There are the green needles again. You even got my green little diamond over here. So we're a little high. But anyway, doesn't end up being a problem because obviously we's going around. We's going missed. There we go. And as soon as we go missed, we're hitting our missed approach, RNAV, so we go right back to the magenta needles. So anyway, this shows you a little bit of an example of actually using an ILS approach. And this is Santa Barbara for you. Anywho, so that gives you a little bit of an update on what happened with that accident. Terrible situation.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.